1.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 26th Community Formation Commission meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 5:34. Sam, if we could get a roll call.
Sure, thank you, Chair. Commissioner Adam Malikan. Absent. Commissioner Alonso.
Here.
Commissioner Chavez. Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Killebrew.
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
Commissioner Sander.
Here.
Commissioner Wood.
Here.
Vice Chair Zepeda.
Here.
And Commissioner Reynaud.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Sam. We'll move to public comment on items that are not on today's agenda. Sam, do we have anyone from the public that would like to give public comment on items that are not on today's agenda?
Give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please click on the hand raise feature. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom platform. There are no hands raised.
Thank you. So now we'll close out public comment and we'll move to the administrative agenda. And we'll start with announcements. No real announcements other than, John, is now an appropriate time to talk about the memo, or would you like to wait until we get to item 7?
Chair Escobedo, whatever you prefer. I'd be happy to talk about it now or wait. Maybe since we raised it, it'd probably be a good time
Yeah,
to talk about it now. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Escobedo, members of the commission. I just wanted to make everyone aware that I know we have a written draft of the commission, so the report. So what I wanted an opportunity to do is to take about 2 weeks time, so in time for our next commission. I'd get to the commission a little bit earlier than that, a written draft of a memo that I plan to provide to the commission on legal analysis of the proposal. And it'll strictly be a legal analysis, nothing on policy. So for example, one issue is, are there any issues with the commission the commission that is recommended by the Civilian Information Commission that has powers that overlap the Fire and Police Commission, right? And for example, the issue in that is, since the Fire and Police Commission is a chartered commission mandated by voters of the citizens of Santa Barbara, are there any California Constitution issues, preemption issues that we need to be aware about? I have not come to an analysis on that issue yet, but at least it's something that I want to be able to do. So at least present to the commission any legal concerns, present the memo to the commission, and then we can place on the agenda a discussion on the memo, any questions the commission may have on it. So that's what I plan on doing. So in preparation for dealing with this issue now, before the final draft is done.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. And with no other announcements, we will move to item B, which is consideration and action on the draft Community Formation Commission meeting minutes for January 19th, 2022. Do we have any edits from the commission for January 19th, 2022? I'm not seeing any. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion from Christian, a second from Rich. Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. So if we could move to a roll call vote, please, Sam.
Sure, just let me open it up to public comment. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 4B, consideration and action of the community formation minutes of January 19th, please raise your hand. If there's anyone who'd like to speak on item 4B of the administrative agenda for the meeting minutes of January 19th, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion and go to roll call vote. There's been a motion by Commissioner Alonso, seconded by Commissioner Sander to approve the meeting minutes of January 19th, 2022. Commissioner Adam Malikan, Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez, Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Sander,
Yes.
Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
and Commissioner Reyno.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And that closes out item 4. So we'll move on to item 5, which is working group updates. Do we have any working group updates? Rachel, did you want to give an update from the focus group, working group?
Yeah, sure. The new focus group working group met for the first time, and we've been meeting with Cami and also with Elise from CCI, Center for Court Innovation. So we are, well, actually now about in a cycle of meeting 1 to 2 extra meetings a week. Elise has started working on a facilitator guide for the focus groups. So that's what we're working on now with her, coming up with kind of based on our conversations at full commission meetings, looking at the themes and particular questions that we want to make sure to ask in the focus group. So we should have that ready to bring to the full commission, hopefully at the next, I'm not sure when the next meeting is, but hopefully soon.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you for leading that group and corralling us. Difficult sometimes. So appreciate you. We're now going to open up public comment for working group updates, Sam, and then close out this item.
Okay, give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 5, working group updates, please raise your hand. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 5, working group updates, please click on the raise hand feature in the Zoom platform. There are no hands raised, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. So now we'll move on to item 6, which is CFC introduction presentations. And we'll receive a brief update on the presentations we've been doing out with stakeholders, updating them and introducing ourselves. Louisa?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sam, I'm not sure if I can share my screen. I'd like to share a document, please. Let's see. Make sure I actually choose the right thing here. There we go. Okay, so the last time I spoke to you all, I was really pushing everyone to get out and present. I am glad to say that that has had an effect. Now we have, as of now, we have participating commissioners in the providing presentations to our community. We have Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Adam Malikan, Commissioner Alonso, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Rodriguez, Commissioner Sander, myself, and Commissioner Vice Chair Ana Zepeda. We've now had 13 presentations in September, 8 still to members of law enforcement, 5 presentations to community organizations. 2 of the completed presentations have been held since last meeting. So that includes League of Women Voters Santa Barbara and WIP SB. We have 8 scheduled presentations to be completed in January and the beginning of February, because we have a few days left in January. To El Centro, Healing Justice Santa Barbara, Independent Living Resource Center, Friends on the Streets, Santa Barbara Community College Planning Council, Santa Barbara Community Action Network, Healing Justice Youth Council, Santa Barbara College of Law. And we also have 2 presentations that I know of at this moment to be scheduled, but is in the works, that should say, but is in the works. Santa Barbara Unified School District and Pacific Pride SB. And Same message as before. We have this last week of January and the beginning of February to complete these introductory presentations. I'm going to again, as you all know, we have the focus groups, community cafes that are scheduled to start in second week of February. I do see your hand, Lizzie, just 1 second. And I'm going to urge all of you to complete at least one. If not, we can get more in there. This has been so great. And I'm going to stop share here. Getting the message out there has been super important. And I'm excited to see us all getting out there. Let's keep going. Lizzie.
There's one more that's tentatively scheduled. We're just waiting for the confirmation, and that's 2 presentations to the administrative or justice administration program at City College. So I imagine that will be about between 50 and 60 students.
Okay, fantastic. That's it for me. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for summarizing all that and compiling all the information from each of the presentations. I'm excited to see what it looks like at the end of everything. Sam, can we open up public comment one more time before we get to the main item tonight?
Sure. Give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 6, CFC introduction presentations, please raise your hand. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 6, CFC introduction presentations, please click on the hand raise feature in the Zoom platform. There are no hands raised, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. So we will close out item 6 and we'll move on to our main discussion item, which is item 7, discussion and review of draft language for the oversight model. The Community Formation Commission will discuss and review the draft language for the oversight model. The CFC may take action on approving part or all of the language for the purposes of later making a recommendation to the City Council. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kami.
Thank you. So all of you have had some time with this document. I think you all received it last Friday. And also an additional, not only the Google Doc, but a Word version to help with edits. And I did receive some edits ahead of time from some of the commissioners. Some of them, the edits were put a comma here, a semicolon here, period here. I just want to let you know I put those all in and I've accepted those changes. I didn't want to spend your time this evening going over those. And there were a lot of them, and it kind of also kind of jumbled up the page a bit. So another thing that has been changed in here and accepted already, just to let you know, there were a couple comments around how confusing it was where we had OPO and DPO and trying to figure out which one we were talking about at any given moment. And were we really talking about the DPO or were we really talking about the OPO? Because they're sometimes very interchangeable in the language and it's a little hard to decide which one it should have been. So anytime where it was the director of police oversight, instead of putting DPO, that now says director. And just to make it more clear, to make it read a lot easier. And so that people can worry about the actual substance about it, of the document, rather than who are we really talking about. So I've gone ahead and put that in there and accepted those changes to also kind of make it a cleaner document for you to review. But my intention tonight from that, with that given stance that some of the easier edits have been accepted, I have also added all of the other edits that people have suggested so far. My intention is some of those were for the review section. We are gonna hold off on going over all of the edits that people submitted for that, because I want us to start with the auditor monitor element, try to get through all of that. And if we have time, then we'll go ahead and go back up to the top and go through that portion one more time. But I'd really like to focus on the auditor monitor element this evening solely. and hopefully we'll get through it. My intention is to go through each paragraph, talk about the edits that I received, and then pause to see if there are any additional comments that people would like to add about anything else that they might not have had a chance to submit ahead of time. Any questions, comments before we start? Okay, Gabe?
I was just going to remind us of the format too, if we could use the same format that we used last time to check in with John and Sean for feedback.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the starting in the first two paragraphs under the creation of the Office of Police Oversight, we have changing the first sentence slightly just to say the Community Formation Commission recommends that an Office of Police Oversight be created. The other thing in that paragraph that came up in multiple edits that I received is people did not like the word that it was going to live in the city administrator's office. So it was suggested by one of the commissioners to change that language to will be housed in the city administrator's office. Any other comments on that first paragraph? Any issues with those changes? And I'll also open it up to you, John and Sean, if you have anything as well.
No other comments for this section.
Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to the second paragraph there. And this suggestion was made to change, originally had talked about promoting cultural change within the department, and the suggested change is promoting a positive community-centered culture within the departments. And I believe that is the only change that had been mentioned in that paragraph. Any additional edits or changes or comments? Any issues with accepting the change? I'm so glad to hear that. That I, just so the author of that sentence knows, I will be using that elsewhere. I think that that's a great way of kind of restating that, the promoting cultural change. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and accept all of these. Okay, so let's move down to the next section, which starts the duties and authorities section. So I'm going to start, Sean. Sorry, I didn't officially call out, but yeah, do you have a comment, Sean? I see your hand raised.
No, I do apologize, and forgive me for being off screen. I'm under the weather at the moment. Could you please go back? I tried to raise my hand when you were talking
Absolutely.
about the previous paragraph.
Yes.
I appreciate the opportunity just to speak to this, and I just wanted to say regarding the broad organizational change.
This up here, in the first sentence.
Yes. I don't know if this is kind of assumed in that statement, but perhaps it being qualified with when there is a need identified, as opposed to just encouraging a broad organizational change without analysis that identifies the need. If that makes sense, I'll just offer that for consideration.
Thank you for that, Sean. Any comments to that? Rachel?
I mean, would it, I mean, I take that point. That actually is really an interesting point about the sentence. I'm wondering if, can we add just a clause of like referencing the work of the Civilian Oversight Board? So like when deemed necessary by the COB in collaboration with this director position or something like that. Sort of tying it more to like the work of the commission, not just encouraging broad organizational change, but actually tying it to the goals of the oversight board.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you for that. So like with all of the other times that we've done this, I'm going to add those comments there and then go back, and the next time we meet, kind of propose some additional language that addresses concerns. And so with that, I am going to go to the next, if everyone is okay to move on to authorities and duties, or duties and authorities. Okay, so the first section, section 1, the only change was carrying out rather than the OPO carries. Any other issues with item or comments, questions about section 1? And then John and Sean, I'll just say, if you guys want to jump in at any time, just feel free as we're moving through here.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Absolutely. Okay, section 2, regarding the development of the policy for the complaints process. Christian?
I don't see anything here that immediately stands out to me, except for I just want to make sure that the corresponding relationship with the Civilian Oversight Board that's outlined a little bit here is in sync with the draft for the COB, and I think that it is, but I just wanted to make sure that, like in the powers and duties section of COB, that there's no discrepancy there.
Okay, great point. Okay, that is a good point. I'll just make a note to kind of go through those 2 sections and just make sure that everything lines up and there are not any contradictions or something that's left out of one or the other that's mentioned in the others duties.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else? Okay. Yes,
Sorry, this is Sean.
that's okay.
This may be actually consistent with what Commissioner Alonso just brought up, but regarding the investigating complaints, perhaps there would be a reference to for receiving and investigating complaints under conditions described in, and then identify that section where that's laid out a little bit more detailed.
Oh, in the section E of the document?
I believe so. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Sean. Okay. Unless anybody else has anything else for section 2, move on to section 3. So section 3 is dealing with annual reports. And there were some suggested language changes in here to add detailing the work product of both the COB and the OPO. This includes, but not limited to, reporting on hold on, let's see, one little, there we go. And then if we're looking at the list of items, it was suggested that we add identifying statistics or measures that may be relevant to the community, but are currently missing, unreported, or underreported. And I added the comment that went with this because I think that it's a nice explanation of the instance of an example of what that might look like. So like if you're looking and there's no data that identifies the number of undocumented people who are arrested annually, or if there's no record of how many LGBTQ plus people who are involved in police shootings, etc., then the OPO could identify and highlight these areas of information that would be helpful to have in the future, whether it's in reporting or in data collection itself, so that they can be addressed. So that's why that was added. And then some additional language around kind of the 9, which was kind of a catch-all anyway, that just says, if needed, additional reports may be, public reports may be issued by the OPO throughout the year. And that would look like if there was a special audit that was done, that they could do a report just on the findings of that audit. Like an example would be if someone did an audit on use of force reporting, then it would be a standalone report perhaps. So any comments on any of the proposed changes or any additional changes or questions? And then John and Sean, I also invite you to any comments you might have. Any issues with the proposed changes? Okay. Okay. Great. Okay, the next section is the OPO shall actively and an ongoing basis monitor the SBPD's compliance with its own policies, procedures, and governing laws. So there were in the subsections of this a few changes that were proposed. In subsection 2, there is the Director of Police Oversight will work in collaboration with the COB on these recommendations, submitting them to the board for feedback prior to submission to the Chief of Police and ultimately the City Council. It was felt that there needed to be a little, although the intent was always to submit them to the Chief of Police, otherwise the rest of it doesn't make, the next one doesn't make sense. It just clarifies that it goes to the chief first for response and then ultimately will be sent to the City Council.
Cami, would you mind scrolling up a bit? Or just so we can see that part on the screen? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm working from 2 different screens and I keep forgetting to actually move the one you're all seeing, so I apologize. So here is that language. Christian?
I'm wondering on subsection 2 here, the Director of Police Oversight will work in collaboration with the COB on these recommendations, submitting them to the board for feedback prior to submission to the chief and City Council. I haven't seen language like that in other ordinances that I can recall, and I wonder if that would be like unnecessarily prohibitive to the DPO to submit things to the police department when they can report on what they submitted to the board at the regularly scheduled meetings and have that be present in their board packets and that kind of stuff.
Well, these would be specific this section is specific to recommendations for policy changes. So they would need to go to this is about where they go after the director and the COB have decided to make the recommendations, then where do they go next? And so in this case, it would be, which is further outlined in the next subsection, to the chief to then respond to. So, and that, I think, when you're looking at it in that context, that is something that shows up in other ordinances or recommendations, where there's a little bit more of the process
Yeah,
outlined.
thank you. That clarifies it a lot. So this is just in relation to compliance.
Right.
Okay.
And recommendations on the compliance with its own policies, procedures, and governing laws. So if there's anything that's found to be out of compliance or issues that are found in that audit or monitoring, then those recommendations would go to the chief.
Yeah, and I think it's outlined well because it's like a subsection of this point, but maybe we can like add the word compliance or something to like specify the types of recommendations that are being made.
Okay.
So that it's not like applied to other recommendations.
Okay.
Christian, can you explain a little bit more why you want to specify compliance recommendations? Because that feels limiting or restrictive.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it's sort of a semantic one that I'm making. But I guess like when I read it, I was like, oh, well, I don't know that that makes sense for all types of recommendations, right? Because the DPO will be making lots of different kinds of recommendations. This one is specifically about like compliance with their own policies and procedures, with the department's policies and procedures. So I was thinking, you know, we would just want to make it more clear that we're talking about a process that's specific to monitoring and auditing compliance specifically, as opposed to like other types of recommendations. I wouldn't want to limit the DPO's office in transmitting recommendations to the police department on all recommendations, because there might be just like routine stuff that they are sending over.
And so when you're saying compliance, I'm just really trying to understand, are you saying that these would be ensuring that the department is practicing the spirit of that policy?
I think so. It's like the section specifically is about actively and on an ongoing basis monitoring compliance with its own policies, procedures, and governing laws. And so I'm talking specifically about that type of recommendation.
So I might have confused it a little. So there's something also to take into consideration besides the compliance in the main power and duty, because in subsection 1, it also talks about in its monitoring shall review policy, procedures, and training and make associated recommendations based on findings to address any areas of concern. So 2 is really kind of taking the compliance with its own policies and any other recommendations that it finds regarding the training, the policy, procedures, and training that's outlined in subsection 1. So maybe we do need to do maybe some clarification there, that 2 is really applied to all of that. Gabe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna point that out to Cami and also say, I mean, the only recommendations that I think wouldn't go to the police chief first for comment would be recommendations that pertain to maybe the way the COB operates or something that didn't directly affect the Santa Barbara Police Department, but if it's recommendations on policy, procedure, training, those sorts of things, I'd imagine that they would all follow the same process and go to the police chief. They would have a time limited response time frame, and then you have subsection 5, which talks about disagreements.
Okay. Any other comments on Sean?
Thank you. Probably consistent with the chair's comments is that if it's some sort of recommendation or action item for the department, the chief being the department head, I would suggest probably would want an opportunity to respond and maybe even just immediately rectify or adopt those recommendations. So I think that might be an important process. Just a second minor comment would be consideration for active monitoring is pretty broad. Maybe there might be some room for describing some sort of methodology, maybe in this document or maybe an attachment or something. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Before we move on, let's talk about sub-item 4. There was a suggestion to add language about if there is, because I think like Sean said, a lot of these matters are things where, you know, there's recommendations, they go to the chief responds. If for some reason there is disagreements or the two entities are unable to resolve differences, language about where does this go for resolution, and the suggestion was made that it would go to the city council for resolution as an elected body. So that's brand new language in here that I wanted to make sure everybody felt comfortable with. Christian?
I really don't have a problem with it at all. I just wonder, it's kind of interesting that the COB would not be involved in that at all. And I'm wondering if there should be some procedure thing where like maybe the COB reviews those before they're transmitted, reviews that like disagreement or whatever, like the DPO says, hey, I'm going to city council, or me collaboratively with the SPPD are going to the city council because we can't come to an agreement on this particular item. And so we'll have the city council resolve it. But it seems in the current form that the COB is completely left out of that conversation. And I don't know that that makes sense.
Is it maybe as easy, since this is a recommendation rather than like the detailed process, could it be just as easy as at a list? So SPBD, OPO, and the COB. So all of those entities, if there is a dispute and they're unable to resolve it, then the entity that resolves those disputes would be the city council.
I think so, yeah.
Does that work? Does everybody feel comfortable with that?
If I may, Cami, and I did make it home finally. So, Sam, can you send me another meeting invite? I don't know why it's not on my computer calendar. That way I can log in my computer. Here's my concern with that section. So, the city council, you know, it's a policy issue. If I could look at it, it's a way a department's being addressed, right? So the way I read that, the beginning part, right, in terms of making recommendations on concerns of the community, Santa Barbara Police Department, you know, how it's operating, right? And I do like the idea that Sean recommends that they bring these recommendations to the chief of police to address them first, right? Being a first step to see if they can be addressed, the recommendations, and have that meeting. If for some reason there is a disagreement in implementation or it's not being done well. I think before city council, if you look at the structure of the city, the next step would be actually the city administrator, right? Because the chief of police reports to the city administrator. That's who the chief of police's boss is. The city council essentially supervises two employees, the city attorney and the city administrator. They have the power to hire them, they do their reviews, and they have the ability to terminate them. All other city employees are not are either under, if you look at the branches, either city attorney's office. So my bosses are at Cologne with everyone under my office, and the city administrator. Every other department, basically 98% of the city employees are under her. She's a top level employee there. So that would make it sense, at least the next step. Now I understand council to be made aware of situations or policies, but to mediate, the problem is to mediate disputes, right? And I'll probably go over this section more in my memo, but I at least wanted to address a little bit of it now. You know, if it's an administrative issue with a department, the people tasked with handling the administrative aspect of it at the first end are the police chief and then the city administrator. So to skip that process, the city administrator, I think is critical, not to include him or her. That has to be done to deal with at least policies or procedure. Now that's what councils entrust the city administrator to do, is to make sure the city is well managed and run. So to me, that would be the next level of any report, going to be first the chief and then the city administrator.
Okay. Gabe?
One question for John. Did I hear you right that what we could do is we could send it to the city administrator and at the same time notify city council, so they wouldn't be the decision maker for that part of the process, but they would be notified?
So there's nothing wrong with notification. I think what makes it at least practical is to notify. Obviously, the first would be the first step of the chief of police, right? Work with the chief of police, being the department, right? And having a good working relationship for this board is very critical, right? To be able to do this and implement recommendations and get into the details of what needs to be done per an issue that arises. I think if that issue is not being addressed in a way, let's say, and it's a case-by-case basis, right? How are the commission and the chief of police want to work it out in terms of, doing a follow-up on it or whatever. If they feel it's not being addressed, would be to notify the city administrator. It can be done concurrently. It'd be unusual for a city council to be aware of issues of the department in that manner. Not to say it can't be done, not to say it's precluded. So I know I'm gearing a little more into policy here, but the reason I mention that is because here's a practical point of it, right? Let's say city council is notified. What city council would do is tell the city administrator, fix this issue or whatever it may be. So it would make sense to go at that point. I don't think there's anything precluding city council ever from being notified, but those who would really rectify the situation would be the chief of police and the city administrator, because the city council would do the same, direct those two individuals to address an issue that needs to be addressed. So I don't know if I answered your question directly. You could, but I would look at it like chief of police, then the city administrator, and then if they feel the thing's being addressed, reporting it to city council.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. And I think perhaps language that, because John said a couple of things in there that made me think that perhaps there does need to be language that that this is something that if all other avenues have been exhausted, this clause is not met for, at least my understanding, is that it was not met as anytime there's a disagreement just take it to the city administrator, because any civilian oversight mechanism works best when there's collaboration and conversation. And so maybe additional language has to be put in there so that's clearer that this is kind of an option of last resort. Lizzie?
My assumption is that there will be times when the oversight body will make recommendations that the department or the chief doesn't agree with. So I think that's just something to expect for a variety of reasons. And I'm wondering when would be a situation that we would want to present this to city council or the city administrator outside of the normal quarterly reports that the body would do. Which then makes me ask, did we include that in this quarterly reports to the city council? Because that's a typical, the police department also gives quarterly reports.
It's not in here currently, that piece. And so there are examples where and I have to tell you, there are lots of issues before you get to the one where there's that kind of disagreement, where there is just a complete lack of receptiveness to any recommendations, or, I mean, it could go both ways. It could be a complete unwillingness of either party to see the other party's side, and that both of them feel very strongly about their position. And, you know, sometimes that ends up in somebody else's hands so that they can move past it. And that happens every so often. I will say that most oversight agencies and police departments see the benefit of working together and not getting to that point where there's a lot of communication. And that if there's disagreement, there's a lot of communication as to why that disagreement exists. So it does happen. And sometimes recommendations include something that for the worst case scenario rather than the current scenario.
If I may, to help the commission too. So for example, the Fire and Police Commission can make recommendations to city council on the operation of the police department and fire department. We've done that, for example, a recommendation supporting a budget, a letter the commission, appoints someone to author and issue to the council. So I can view that being the way the commission has an issue and authors it to the city council. It might not be an agendized item. The council may decide, per the process they have to put an item, agree to put it up, or we may not hear a response. So that's why I think, a lot, if there's an issue, I think there's, some steps into it, because we're being even more specific, in the way I read this, and is, dealing more with, when we have the monitor, they're going to be dealing more with daily issues than, for example, Fire and Police Commission would, because they meet once a month. So if there are, and as Cammie said, you want to have that collaborative working relationship. If you have that, like I said, there probably always will be disagreements, and when you're having a kind of more thorough review like that. So to me, it makes sense to at least work it out with the chief, is not then city administrator, and then go into a council. But again, it would be a recommendation. Whether council decides to act on that or point that out is up to them, and how they want to address it. They want to agendize the item or not. So that's why I also recommend at least the city administrator, because that can get involved in that next level. So thank you.
Okay, great. So I will work on some language for that section in particular, and it looks like we also need to work on some for section 2 to make it a little bit more clear that it's talking about all sorts of recommendations, not just compliance, not just towards training, policies and procedures. So I'll work on those two for the next time we meet, if that works, and if no one else has any other suggestions or comments. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so next we have section 5, conduct community outreach and education on the complaint process. Anyone have any comments on that? And then, of course, John and Sean, feel free to jump in if you have any comments as well. Okay, section 5. So section 5 just had one edit submitted already, and that was to change felt to found.
Yeah, I agree with that change. And I honestly think that the entire first sentence up to section E is unnecessary, especially if we're talking about like feelings and that kind of stuff. We're talking about the powers and duties. So I think it would make more sense if it just read, the COB may, by a 2/3 vote, authorize the OPO to initiate an independent investigation based on the items outlined in section E.
Okay. So you're seeing getting rid of everything from here to here, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And I'm not sure like why it needs to be qualified in the way that it's currently being qualified by that first sentence.
Okay. Thanks for that, Christian. Sean, I see your hand up.
And thank you. I guess I would, if I could just offer the idea that perhaps there is some value in identifying that this is occurring where there's facts that support the investigation is inadequate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sean. Any other comments? Questions? Any reactions to the suggestion that was just made by either Christian or Sean? Gabe?
It's like it's an interesting suggestion. I haven't exactly figured out where I come down. I think the value of having a qualifying statement before that is that section E is so far away that it provides a little more context. But I do think it's interesting. I'm wondering, I would really like to hear from some other people. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabe. Demo?
Yes, I agree with what Sean suggested, and also maybe specifying like who finds it, like what's the process, like in the case where it's found, like you know what I mean? It just seems like you it's not referencing anyone specifically, so maybe just more language on that would just be more concrete.
Okay. I don't know if it's whom or who, sorry. Okay, any additional, Christian?
Yeah, the only other problem I have with this section is that there is not a corresponding powers and authorities section in the Civilian Oversight Board powers and duties that outline they can authorize this by a 2/3 vote. And I wonder if this would be better placed in that section because it's actually talking about a power and duty of the COB to authorize an investigation and maybe change the wording for the OPO to say they will conduct the investigation if directed by a 2/3 vote majority of the COB. But in any case, however we word it, there's no corresponding power and duty section in the COB section that says they can do this.
Okay. Okay, I'm taking notes on the things that you guys are noting about those two. So when we go through and kind of do that, our own little audit of the two sections of powers and duties, I'll note that. I do think, to Demo's point, in the case where it's found and who is finding that, I think that it's the OPO or the director and the COB. That was how I thought that the working group intended it. So please let me know if that's incorrect. Lizzie?
What you just stated is outlined in section E. So I wonder, and thank you, Christian, for bringing this up because I think it makes it a lot more clear. So how about if that sentence just starts with, as outlined in section E, the COB may, and then, include that, or also include the 2/3 vote in section E. And then, as outlined in the section E, the COB may initiate an independent investigation.
Okay, so you are also saying that you'd like to see the first part of that sentence gone, but then replaced with as outlined in section E.
Yeah, because section E does outline that. It is noted in there, but what's not noted in there is the 2/3 vote.
Okay. Thank you, Lizzie. Rachel?
Yeah, this is, I'm in support of all of that y'all just laid out for this particular section. But since we're talking about the kinds of things we'll do when we audit this document, so making sure that things reference, what they're referencing is actually there, and that this section references what's in the COB section. I just want to also, because this is something I noticed reading through that I didn't want to suggest changes for every instance, but there is a lot of passive voice. So it is found, right? Like the problem with that is that it's passive voice and there's no actor. And that's why we have to ask found by whom. So I'm just thinking maybe in the internal audit, let's actually just look at every instance of passive voice and make sure it's clear who's actually acting on that. Because I think in terms of recommendations, using somebody will do something or some entity will do rather than it is found, it will be,
No, thank you, Rachel. That's a great point. Lizzie, do you have another comment? No. Okay. Okay. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? Because we kind of have a split here on the first sentence. Or is this one that you would like for there to be some work in the next couple of weeks on language and to try and come back with something that takes into consideration as much of what has been said here as possible? Lizzie?
I don't feel particularly strongly about that, so I'm fine if we leave it as is with the found in that.
Okay. With the found and some active language and some other things to make it more clear, for sure. Anybody else? Okay. Okay. So as we move on, section 7, there were no suggested changes sent to me about section 7. Anybody have any comments about that they'd like to put forth now? Christian?
I just wanted to, if you could scroll up just a bit to the corresponding section with number 6, where it outlines subpoena power. A lot of the other ordinances outline explicitly the subpoena power of the office. And here we have it kind of tucked under a different section about independent investigations. And I'm wondering if it warrants its own section that outlines the subpoena power of the Office of Police Oversight.
Okay, any demo? I see your hand up.
Yes, so I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I just had thought of another word as opposed to found, maybe determined. Just as a suggestion, because it shows more of like a concrete, like there's a determination based on some sort of evidence. Because fine can also be, it's better than felt, but fine can also be like, well, I just found that it was, it could be a little emotion too. So maybe determined is just more concrete, and it just shows that it was based on a determination based on some sort of evidence or some sort of, we could determine the criteria at some point, but, just a suggestion for that.
No, thank you. That's great. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay. Anything else on that before I move on back to onto Christian's comment about the subpoena power? So does anybody, so there is a subpoena power section in the review section. We can copy it from and make another section here so that it's in both places. And then it's actually, so that it then is also appearing in section E. Is that something that people feel comfortable that we can kind of, in that audit that we're doing to make sure that everything kind of lines up, if that's one of those things that can be put into that process? Christian?
I feel comfortable with that, and I think that it should just be, part of this process going forward, and I'm happy to help with that however I can. I do see where these sections have also been outlined in the coming sections, and I hate to stall us here, but on the powers and authorities section particularly, I think it's important to be very explicit about what the office can do, like what it's authorized to do. So that's why I want us to be like very specific here. And I know that it's outlined in another section, but I would like it to be like explicit here that the office has subpoena power. As opposed to saying like, it's covered in the other section.
Okay. Well, and I think also that it has subpoena power in this instance as well, so that it's very clear like when the office has subpoena power, because it is attached in these recommendations. It's very much attached to independent investigations as outlined. So I think that we need to make that clear as well. Okay, perfect. Thank you for those comments. Okay, any other comments on section 6? John, Sean, if you have any additional that you want to throw in?
There was a couple on that. So we're in 6 right now, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Forgive me if this was already brought up, but would the process be that the director works through the city attorney's office to issue subpoenas?
Yes, I think it's actually in section E. It's actually, I think that comes up. That it's, I can't remember if it's in section E or if it's actually in the first section in the review board section when we talk about subpoenas, but the city attorney's office is mentioned.
Just for consistency, this language would suggest that the director, him or herself, would issue the subpoena.
Okay. We'll definitely go through and make sure that the language about subpoenas is consistent with what everybody approved in the review section. And we'll just carry that through to make sure, because I think the intent behind all of it is the same, but obviously we need to work on the language so everybody that's clear.
The question I had, Cammie, when I read this, so when we have our subpoena power right now for our commissions, and how I've seen it done is we can compel the testimony of someone at a hearing, right? So the Fire and Police Commission can compel someone at a tow hearing. The Civil Service Commission can compel someone to testify at a disciplinary hearing. And like in court, you can compel a witness to testify either at a deposition or at a issue subpoena for that, or at a trial. But what it seems here is you can issue a subpoena to participate in an administrative investigation, so to be interviewed. I don't know if, that's gonna be part of my memo. I don't know if we have the ability to require someone to testify in an interview via subpoena, right? So how we do with our employees is their employees, failure to participate in the interview is an act of insubordination that could lead up to dismissal, right? And the reason we can do that is the employer has a right to know what's going on in their workplace. So they could mandate the employee to testify or to be interviewed on something, even it could be criminally incriminating. And then we give what's called a live barger warning for peace officers, Spielbauer, for other public employees based on the name of these cases, which basically says that you know, in terms of you have to let us know. Now, a lot of times in that situation, or an officer will pick either their job or their freedom, we say, right? Either I'm gonna let know what's going on, or I want to quit so I don't have to say anything incriminating. So that goes back to my question of, I could see it at a hearing issuing a subpoena, but I don't know a process where, and that's what I'll have to look to see if we have a process to participate in an administrative interview, right? How we mandate, if, for example, when our professional standards division does interviews, if we want the officers to testify, and Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, we order them in, give them notice, they can have their representative, they testify, and whether they're a witness or whether they're subject. If it's a citizen, we ask that they come in and be interviewed, or we can go out to them, whatever the case may be, but we can't compel them, and we don't have subpoena power over to participate in administrative investigation. So I just want to make that point clear, which I'll further look into as part of it, but as I'm putting this memo together. But that was at least one concern I wanted to bring to the commission's attention now, that I don't know if we can issue a subpoena to compel someone to sit down with the commission's investigator in that situation, if they're a non-employee.
Okay.
Now, if they're an employee, we could have something in the ordinance where employee must participate in administrative investigations by the commission. That'd be different.
Okay. Thank you for that, John. And I did pull up the section from the review board on issuing subpoenas that we talked about at our last meeting. And that there was language added: to the extent permitted by law, issue subpoenas for the purpose of compelling testimony or receiving relevant documents from third parties when independent investigations are initiated. And so that was the language that I was talking about making consistent, but I do agree. I think as the legal review of all of the recommendations are being done, I think adding language that can make that even clearer about what can and cannot be done will be helpful.
I do like as permitted by law, because then that allows to go up to the limits, and if legally we can't issue one for a private citizen, compel them to stop an investigator, that takes care of that. So that's pretty good language, because it covers our limits.
Okay. Great. Well, then I will definitely move that down so that language that were used below not only mimics this language, but also takes into account section E. So we'll work on that. Lizzie? And she's gone. Sean, I saw your hand up as well. Did something that get said answer your question?
Yeah, perhaps. I was just trying not to contribute unnecessarily. I'll give you an example of what John was talking about. There are circumstances where there's a incident where one of our employees perhaps may be a witness or involved, and another agency is investigating it, and we can compel that employee to cooperate, and that doesn't require a subpoena. So there are structures already that exist that also might play a role in how our department cooperates with the DPO.
Thank you for that, Sean. Appreciate it. Okay, so let me move back down here to the section. Okay, so we will work on that language and bring it back for the next time. So I'm adding to our list, working group, just be ready. Okay. So I am going to move down to section 7. Anything else, anything on section 7 that anyone would like to talk about? John and Sean, also you, if there's anything you would like to contribute to that section.
My only thought was, I thought we were gonna have language as extent permitted by law. For example, off the top of my head, their juvenile records, right? Or certain sex crimes, right? There's the penal code provides who has access to that. So I think that would be something that, so we have that right there. So good.
Okay, so we
So
should be
that-
covered by that.
We should be covered by that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, the next section is regarding misconduct investigations. And I did not receive any edits to this. Does anybody have any comments or additional edits? Gabe?
I'd like to ask John, because I know when I talked to John about the memo, this is one section that he asked if we hold off on until he does his legal analysis. John, did you still want us to hold off?
Yes, Chair Escobedo, Commission. My concern is a couple things. One, it's and I don't see a chat function because I would put the link up. I don't know why I can't find it on my computer, but it's Title 3, Chapter 3.16 of the Municipal Code, which is the civil service system, and in there talks about the ability of who is issuing discipline. It talks about the appointing power, and then you also have a board that talks about the charter of the civil service, in terms of reviewing such disciplines. So my concern is the conflicts of what we have in the charter, what's in the municipal code as well, and if we could conflict with this section, as well as what that recommendation looks like in terms of it presents a whole host of issues that is the same body that's looking at the investigation, the thoroughness, and making a finding, also proposing discipline. So it's a concern also from checks and balances. Could we find an issue or be challenged on that? So I would want to hold on that for that one portion of the recommendation, because I'm concerned about preemption issues as well as conflict issues.
Okay, thank you, John and Gabe, for bringing that up. So until we have the memo, unless anybody has any strong objections, I suggest we move on from this one.
And And one more thing I wanted to add too, for example, if you're if the body's recommending, there's no procedure for due process too. So if a body is recommending, another concern is thought of recommending discipline to an employee, usually every other level we have a due process. So would the employee be allowed to even challenge that to the board, in terms of the discipline? So it adds another layer that can potentially conflict with what's in place already mandated, because to make a recommendation and not have an opportunity, and we're depriving an employee of a property right? That being his right to continued public employment. And that recommendation is made in a public body, in a public setting, in a hearing, and to make such a recommendation without due process would be a concern as well. So I want to add that final point.
So, John, I have a quick question. Just does that change at all? Because I think the intention here is that the ability to impose discipline would still stay with the chief. That this is just a recommendation to the chief regarding discipline. So does that change that at all?
I think you're on mute, John.
Oh.
I apologize for that. Thank you for catching that. It could very well. Yes, and that's why I want to look at it, because I see how it's structured. And so to me, it's I'm trying to balance and find the right answer, because that's absolutely correct. It could make a difference because it's a recommendation. And what makes it the subtle argument in that, the sophisticated argument, is still, does it hold such sway, having a public body recommending it? And if the chief follows it, right, the public employee could basically be saying that they are playing devil's advocate here, is they're influenced by such a decision. Why, I had never had an opportunity to be heard or mitigate my case before this board, to prevent such an influence or such a recommendation, right? So that's the problem I see within that, because allowing that employee to challenge such a recommendation, right? If the claim would be it's a very influential recommendation.
Okay, thank you. That helps clarify it for me. I appreciate that. Sean, I see your hand up.
If it's my understanding that we're going to come back to this at some point, I can withhold comments, but I do have some positions on this. But is it my understanding that we're going to return to it at some point?
Yes, so I think we will return to it after we have John's memo in hand, so we'll return to it at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, with that said, moving on to staffing. Okay, so so let's start with section 1. I did not receive any edits on this, major edits on this section. So why don't we start with the director of police oversight? Anybody have any comments or questions about that edits? Okay. John or Sean? Okay.
What I was a little is so we have 3 positions total. Is that my understanding of it right there? 2.
There's 2 positions.
Okay, 2. Just 2. Okay, so it's I think so, because I see. Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure of.
Yes, just the 2. Christian?
Sorry, I might have jumped the gun, but I have some questions about the ombuds.
Okay. Anybody else have anything about the director? Lizzie, do you?
I don't have any suggested edits. I guess, want to ask the commission what, I don't know, maybe this isn't an appropriate question, but I understand our city budget right now, and I understand that there's been many folks that have been laid off due to the COVID-related economic downturn. And I'm just curious if this commission or if this body could exist if staffing was prohibited.
Gabe?
I would say no. I think if this body doesn't have staff, you're talking about undermining the effectiveness of the whole thing, in my opinion. And I mean, I guess it's a question for you, Cami. You've worked with oversight agencies across the nation, and I think you would be the best to speak to this, but that's my first inclination.
I would agree with you, Gabe. I think that having full-time staff for an agency is the only way that it really can be effective. If you don't have staff, it's setting it up for, really, you're setting it up to fail. I have seen there aren't a lot of oversight agencies across the country, regardless of size, that do not have staff. There are a few that don't have full-time staff. And those who have no staff are really struggling. Lizzie?
So with that understanding, does able to adequately carry out its duties, is that strong enough language to communicate that?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Any other thoughts on that?
I agree. It's a great point.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I can find some stronger language for that. I'm a big proponent of adequately funding and staffing oversight agencies. And it is one of the 13 principles for effective oversight. So
can we kind of star that and relate that one of the fundamental principles of effective oversight, calls for
okay. Fantastic. Okay. Let me open it up to the community ombuds. Christian.
Yeah, I don't have any edits to this section. I think it's great. I was just hoping that the folks who drafted it could speak to the reasons why they put this in. I'm not super familiar with the term ombuds myself. I had to look it up when I was reviewing it the first time. So would love if you could kind of talk about the methodology behind adding this position as a staff position and why it's important to the function of oversight.
Lizzie, do you want to jump in? Or Lewis? I don't think Seraphina's on the call. I can't see everyone now, but
so I think ombuds is maybe it could be coordinator, it could be another a title, but I think it was to separate or to differentiate between a support staff and a executive level staff.
And using the term ombuds was just really to highlight that it was kind of that the person who is working on behalf of kind of an advocate for the community, for the process, for and it, I think really kind of, there are some examples of how civilian oversight entities have really used that as a great bridge builder, if you will, between law enforcement and the community.
I think that's the key, is it's, even though the director position is also relational and relationship oriented, that's definitely this role would really be cultivating and continuing those strong relationships with all entities involved.
Thanks, Lizzie. Christian?
That's awesome. And thank you for the explanation. I also was wondering, because we're about to talk about hiring in terms of employment as well, and we've talked about contracting out the services of the DPO potentially. And I'm wondering if that would be a similar situation for this ombuds position, or that would be like more similar to a regular city staff position.
Well, in these recommendations, they're essentially, I mean, because of the units listed, is kind of thought that they're employees of the city. I think there are still some questions about what the ability that persons in either one of these positions, what they can and cannot do based on their employment status, whether they're city employees or contractors. You know, as far as what the recommendations, process, all of that, I do think it has, there's some issues there that we'll have to work out. Lizzie?
So when we were looking at contract versus employee, it was mainly because of the restrictions that we had on the type of employment, how they were going to be reviewed, who, like some of the, I don't think it's classified, but some of the restrictions that may not fall within the city's current HR practices. So unless we have those same restrictions on the on this position, then I think it could fall within the city staffing. I kind of feel like that's, I don't know that that needs to be outlined specifically here. I think we can let the city determine that.
Thanks, Lizzie. John?
I no issues in terms of the duties and responsibilities for the community Bud's position, but two things I think need to be clarified, because generally, I just not to confuse the public. One is the assurance that, you know, any complaints given to that position cannot remain anonymous. You know, that they have to be, sometimes in, you know, different processes I've seen it where you give a complaint, it can be remain confidential. We couldn't do that with this position. So so at least and that could be more of a structure working with the city attorney's process to make sure how we receive complaints and all this, a you know, a disclaimer on that. The other part I would say, in terms of the only part of the title of that position is confusing, is a lot of times that position is one that settles disputes or complaints. And so I don't think this position is going to be doing that, correct?
No, that
Okay,
wasn't the
okay.
intention.
Okay, so I think just that point being clarified.
Okay,
That's all I have.
thank you, John. Sean?
Hi, thank you. And I'm going to do my best to articulate this. So I appreciate any grace. Initially, when this was reviewed, the idea of 2 full-time employees was obviously, I wouldn't use the word concern. I was interested in what 2 full-time employees would do. A lot of times, traditionally, when talking about oversight, it's focused on, for example, complaints, specifically formal complaints and use of force. And I was hesitant to understand. However, I will say there's been a lot of discussion, for example, from Commissioner Rodriguez about bridge building and outreach and relationships, and maybe even some like complaint mediation and stuff. So I think that's promising language. But I will say that initially in reviewing the duties and the kind of traditional forms of oversight regarding complaints and the numbers of complaints we receive, that was an item of interest. But I will also say that I do acknowledge that part of the idea of this process is to open up complaints to people who wouldn't otherwise submit them. So I'm acknowledging that as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. Any other comments? John, do you have another comment? I just don't want to miss you. Or is your hand still raised from before?
I apologize. I'll take that down now.
No
Sorry.
worries. I just didn't want to miss you if you had another comment. Okay. Well, then if no one has any other comments or edits on that section, let's move on to hiring and terms of employment. I do want to check in because I'm just continuing to move along. I want to make sure that we don't need to take a break or anything like that. Or if you would like to, I should phrase that differently. If any of you would like to take a break. Nope. Okay. Okay, hiring in terms of employment. So the first one here, there was a suggested edit to add some qualifying language to that subsection or the first section to ensure adequate time to develop systems of operation for the OPO and its duties. And this has to do with why they would need to be contracted or employed for a term of either 3 or 4 years at first. Any concerns with that addition? Any comments? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to accept that change. Okay. The next, well, why don't we take the next sections 2, 3, and 4. There were no additional comments made on those to me previously. Anybody have anything they'd like to add now? And this is regarding at-will positions, only terminated for sufficient cause, that they must never have been employed by a law enforcement agency in Santa Barbara County, and not immediate family members of current or former Santa Barbara Police Department employees. Okay. John or Sean? Okay. Then we shall move on. Section 5. So section 5, there were some suggested changes. This has to do about the performance review of the, the performance of the OPO and the director being reviewed. And there were some changes suggested to this section, and that is in subsection B, following the director's review, and the review and response shall be sent to the city council and city administrator for their input and response. This was essentially just taking out the time frame because they just don't normally work on time frames, and that also, that will be part of a process, of a review process of the office itself. So it'll probably be fairly public process. John?
Okay, so is this the review of the office, not individual employment evaluations? How's that, just to clarify?
So it's both the office and the director is what the section is talking about.
Okay. To me, so as I mentioned earlier, the city council reviews or does the evaluations basically for the city administrator and the city attorney. They don't have any authority over any other employee, so therefore they don't review anybody else's personnel file. In fact, we're very strict on them, giving any in terms of influence input in terms of other city employees. So there's that fine divide line. So if it's to be a city employee, the director, generally, like I said, and if it's under the city administrator, where it's going to be housed with the city administrator, that's the city administrator's employee to supervise. That I could see working with HR that city administrator do the evaluation, and of course get input from the commission as part of that performance evaluation. There's sections, for example, there may be an employee that I partially supervise, so the main supervisor will get my input, right? That's an example of that. But at the end, the city administrator is tasked with filling out and completing the evaluation. And I think it stays there with input from the commission in terms of the performance. For the employees' privacy rights and the hierarchy of the organization, how it works, it really shouldn't go to city council or anything there. At least their performance evaluation, because that's highly private.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is the piece first about with the director that it needs to go to the city administrator, but that also is telling me that we need to divide this section and that it can't, and not kind of convolute the review of the OPO and the director all together.
Correct. Now the OPO, in terms of its department goals, if it reached, it's been deficient, absolutely. You can do that in a report. You can do that quarterly meetings. You can put that on the agenda. You're free. I think there's, that's great. You want to do that. I wouldn't want to put there's really no procedural restrictions on that. But in terms of employee personnel evaluations, that's different. It should be separate. And that should be a relationship between the city administrator and the employee they supervise, and getting input as part of the employee evaluation from the commission. And the city administrator would be tasked going over that evaluation. And for example, here's what I heard from the commission, and going over each category. Here are strong points, here are some weak points, here you need to improve on, here continue to excel on, for example. That's how I would envision it working out and being proper and smooth.
Okay. Thank you for that, John. Any additional comments? Sean, anything? Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Then let's move on to community engagements. So there were a few changes in here. In section 1, adding language about and otherwise accessible outreach. In section 4, actually it was suggested that section 4 and 5 be combined and rewritten to say ensuring all printed and digital communications regarding the work of the COB, sorry, that should be actually OPO, are engaging, timely, thorough, transparent, and accessible by the public. And then the other change that was suggested, at least on this page, affected, change this to say, instead of saying those disproportionately affected by policing, to say by the criminal justice system. Okay, and then let's stop it there. So 1 through 6. Any other additional comments? Lizzie?
I'm just curious how folks feel about the change from policing to criminal justice. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I haven't really thought through it, but I I'm just concerned that this, this body is an oversight body of police, not the criminal justice process. And typically criminal justice is the legal proceedings. Policing is before that. So I'm curious how others feel about that.
Thank you, Lizzie. Louisa?
I'm in agreement with Lizzie on this one. I think this is about policing and not about the process after, if someone should be arrested.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Any other comments? What I'm hearing is that it is left alone. Anybody? Rachel?
I mean, I feel like I don't know if it's worth saying. It's just like, I feel like I want to spend some more time thinking about this, because if this is about, implying things like the public outreach component, then the rest of the criminal justice system, people who are systems impacted, kind of perceptually will lump all that together with policing, right? So if this is like adjacent to the community outreach work that we are recommending that the COB continue to do annually and regularly, yeah, I think I'm inclined to leave it broader if what we intend here is that from a community public perception that policing is part of a much larger system, and that's the way people would see it. But
Thanks, Rachel.
I guess I'll just chime in and say that I'm in agreement with Commissioner Rodriguez and Wood on keeping it the same.
Okay. Gabe?
I guess I'll just voice my support for Commissioner Rachel's suggestion as well.
So for those of you who had mentioned keeping it as policing, do any of you have a problem with leaving it for our next discussion so people can have some time to think about it some more? Any opposition to that? Okay. But no opposition to the changes that were suggested for 1 through 5, correct? Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So the the next question that we have, oh, Sean, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
That's okay. I just thought I'd offer a perspective as the commissioners are considering the decision about criminal justice system and policing, just as perspective. Oftentimes, police are kind of the symbolic group that takes ownership of all the disproportionate systems in the criminal justice system. And oftentimes things that police don't have control over are harmful towards those people in the system. So it might be a consideration to include the system so that there's an educational component of those things that police don't have purview or control over, but it's often understood that that's the case. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I thought I'd offer.
Thank you for that perspective, Sean. Okay, so moving on to section 7, in subsection I, it was talking, so this is about conducting a climate survey. So this section, so this is talking about focusing on the practice of community-based policing and relationship-based policing. So there was someone that asked what was meant by relationship-based policing, and I honestly, it was part of our conversation as a focus group, and I'm hoping that the focus group can help me explain that better to the commission as a whole. Or not the
Are
focus
you-
group, I'm sorry. The
Are
working
you
group.
talking about the promoting restorative approaches? Is that what you're talking about?
Is that what we decided on, that it was really promoting the restorative approaches, but we called it relationship-based policing?
No, I think we just called it, just how it's written there, promoting restorative approaches as such as community mediation, alternative dispute resolution.
Can you scroll up, Cami?
Yeah, so actually I'm talking about this right here,
Oh, surveys.
subsection I. So this should include an internal survey within the SBPD to evaluate the culture and practices of the department, focusing on the practice of community-based policing and relationship-based policing. Louisa?
While I wasn't a part of this focus group, I know that this was a conversation that we had very, very early on. Gosh, back when we had our first focus groups, and we had brought up, and Sean was a part of our group, we were talking about how a lot of policing and the way that, police officers are promoted is based on negative based aspects, things like giving out tickets and not developing relationships. And I know that we had talked about turning it into a relationship-based policing. That was kind of the term, and I think that's where that came out of. And I remember that conversation. Lizzie, I imagine you have more to add, but.
Thank you for that, Louisa.
So this is, it's like a proactive policing. So it's developing relationships with community members as opposed to just community entities. It's person-to-person relationships as a way to, one, get to know and be more familiar with community, for community to feel more comfortable having police in their neighborhoods and knowing or feeling supported and safe by police. And it's not a new practice. It's part of what SBPD and other departments are currently doing, but it's what we're hoping is that a climate survey would also measure that and promote that.
Thank you, Lizzie. So any additional questions around that from anyone?
Yeah, just for a little bit more clarification on that, when I was looking into the different styles, and actually I think it came in out of one of your one of the NACO conferences, a difference between community-oriented policing is it tends, what I heard is that it tends to be transactional, where relationship-based is much more interactive, much more of a experience and a connection. So that has a much deeper purpose.
Thank you, Lizzie. I appreciate that. Does anybody have any other, before we move on to the next section, specifically to subsection I, any other questions surrounding relationship-based policing or comments about that section?
Well, for me, going up just a smidge, the measure of satisfaction, I don't know if we've talked about that.
No, we have not yet. Thank you. Okay, so there was a question. Thank you for that, Kim. So there was a question about measuring satisfaction. Let me put this on here so it's on the screen. Measuring satisfaction with what exactly? We should be specific about what aspect of satisfaction needs to be evaluated. So that was a question to get us to kind of spell that out a little bit more clearly. Any suggestions from anyone on how we can approach that? Because I think it's a really good point.
So the way it reads right now, it's just kind of measuring something, but not, but there's no action or there's no determinant based on that measure. So, and it's kind of hard to set a benchmark without having a pre, like where are we now? And then we set the benchmark for the next evaluation. So I'm wondering, if there's a way to kind of include that language, like measure satisfaction and establish benchmark goals. Would that satisfy your question, Kim?
I think a little, but also I'm wondering, like, is it satisfaction? Like, is it, to me, that implies like happiness, like you're happy with your job. Like, and that seems like to be an HR function, you know, so I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, are we trying to assess if the SBPD are happy with their job?
I think it's, are they happy with the culture in their department?
Rachel, is your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think satisfaction is, yeah, too strange of a term maybe. Because I also feel like in the early days of the survey working group, when we were determining what our purview was as this commission, the idea of this climate survey, a regular climate survey, was to survey public perception of the SBPD and policing, right? Like what we determined was too broad for our purview as the CFC. So I feel like whatever we decide about measuring satisfaction of like, or measuring how SBPD feels about its own culture or things like that, that this is even broader, that it's a climate, like, I mean, a true climate survey is about public perception, which would include what is the public's perception of how well the COB is doing its job and how well the OPO and the SPPD are playing their roles within that. So I'm wondering, right, like if we need to actually just lengthen this section to specify what a climate survey actually entails.
And so it sounds like, so it's actually the community that's filling out the survey, not necessarily SBPD.
Well, that was my impression. Yes, if we're going back to what the original survey, but SBPD is part of the community. So they would also fill out the survey, right? It's the same like our feedback survey that we're about to do. We want the entire breadth of the community to do it, including law enforcement and all these other demographics.
Thank you. Lizzie?
I so appreciate that. And yes, there's two functions of that climate survey. And I like, so the way you said it, Rachel, of measuring the perception of SVPD's performance and practices. I think that's the gist of what we're asking the community to let the commission know. And then the second survey, or in addition, it's also measuring how folks who work in the department feel within that department. And I don't know if Louis is still on this. Yes, if that was something that was suggested by someone who worked in law enforcement, that would be an important component to add.
Thank you for that, everyone. So I have some great notes to take back to the working group, and we'll get some additional language on that kind of pulls that out a little bit and makes that clearer. Gabe?
I think Kim might have had an additional comment to add.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see the hand.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say I like that. I like that solve about building it out and just making it a little bit more clear as to who we're surveying and what the intention of the survey is. So I think that'll solve.
Great, thank you, Kim. Okay, and then the second part, the second subsection of this may be, this probably needs to be reconsidered when we rewrite the first section. I don't know if we'll need this anymore, but the second section, it was suggested that we add language to be more clear about what we were asking for here. So In collaboration with the City of Santa Barbara Human Resources Department, the process would include analyzing information related to employee satisfaction with the SBPD. So I feel like Lizzie, with what you had just mentioned, and Rachel, about the second aspect is about measuring how those in the department feel about the department. This that may negate this section. I don't know how others feel, or negate the need for this section. Any thoughts or comments?
Let's see what the build out looks like and then see if we need to do a subsection.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Then with that, if there are not, Gabe?
I was just gonna say we're approaching 2 hours, and that's about a pretty good time for us to take a small break, if everyone's up for it. Also for you, Cammie, you've been talking the whole time. But I didn't want to cut you off for
No. We're at a good stopping point. We're getting ready to start section E. So if that is the will of the commission.
I'm not hearing any. Okay, cool. So let's take a 10-minute break. So the 10-minute break. So we will go into recess and we will come back at 7:40. All right, we will call this meeting back to order at 7:41, and we'll turn it back over to you, Cammie.
Thank you, Gabe. Okay, so we are moving into the section on independent investigations. So this is broken down into several sections. So I want to maybe take this section by section and start with this first one that you see on my screen. So I think that as we review this, I think one of the things is to make sure it's clear to everybody what the process is. I think in addition to like the very specifics of the language, I just want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of the process, because I think that'll be important for others reading it down the road. So if there is anything in here that is difficult to understand, please speak up, because we want to address it on the front end of this. On this first section, I will say that the only change I received prior was to change it from 45 days or to 45 days from 30, with a one-time extension of 30 days to respond to the OPO and COB's recommendation. COB's recommendation may be requested. And this was really only to make it consistent with language elsewhere about timeframes for response. Any comments on that? Any problems with that timeframe change? John?
Commission, not really a comments or anything, just to make the commission aware. If there are categories of the investigation that deal with categories under SP 1421 or now SP 16 that just got passed and is effective as of January 1st. So it not only includes investigations of sexual assault, dishonesty, great bodily harm, but now we have unlawful searches and such that have been added. People can get records of these requests, even the investigations are complete. I think the condensed timeline is now 45 days initial start of the investigation. Not, we have to comply with law. So there may be requests of such things from members from the public, and if they fit the categories, and obviously looking for legal advice, they may just be disclosed just to make the commission aware of that. That's all.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Christian?
That's a great point too. And I was going to say that. So my understanding basically of what Mr. Doimus just said is that for things like officer involved shootings, this would not be something that the Santa Barbara Police Department would be reviewing or the COB, but rather the state, according to new laws that have been passed at the state level. And I forget which department oversees that, but at the state. But and then I guess with regard to the extension of 30 days, is that a one-time extension of 30 days per remanded investigation, or is that like a one-time period?
So I think the intention is that it's a one-time 30 days for this particular request, for the first request of additional information. Lizzie and Louis, please let me know if your understanding is different.
No, it's as you explained.
So we probably do need to add some language in there that talks about, our fallback of to the extent permitted by law. And then go into this, to this section so that we make sure that all applicable state and local laws are being followed.
Yeah, and I think this is consistent with the reporting requirements that we've outlined elsewhere and talked about what would be reasonable, if nobody else disagrees with that.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are not any additional comments, or I guess John, Sean, any additional comments from either of you?
None, thank you, Tammy.
Okay. Okay, so then let's move on to the second section. That is when the investigation comes back and they do find that they feel that there are still deficiencies in the investigation, kind of that second round of requests. Any comments, questions, concerns? Okay, John or Sean, any additional pertaining to that particular section? Okay. Then the last part of this is that after it returning for the second time, that the CO upon review, the COB can, upon a 2/3 majority vote, direct the DPO, that needs to be changed to director, to work with the city administrator's office to contract with an independent investigator. Okay, any comments, questions, concerns? John, Sean?
No concerns, Tammy, thank you.
Okay.
What would, just out of curiosity, what would 2/3 look like for an 11-person board?
So you'd have to have, well, you'd have to have more than the point, whatever you'd round up.
So I think it's 7.26, but I'm
Yep.
also not good at math, so. So that'd be,
8. So 8 people would have to. And so really what you're saying by saying 2/3 is that it is beyond the normal majority vote. And it also means that, you know, if you have a quorum, many boards often with normal procedures operate with a majority of the board members present. And this would require a 2/3 vote of the full board. Lizzie?
So the reason that this is different than majority is because this would have to be, this is a very rare circumstance, and it would have to be really truly a majority, more than a majority vote to initiate this. I don't know if the city does proxy votes when you're not physically present at the meetings, but I mean, even with our technology now, folks can be present without physically being there. But if we're gonna, if a body is going to initiate this, it has to be more than just one person passed a split vote.
Thank you, Lizzie. Any additional comments, John, Sean? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Okay. Then I will move us along. I will just, as a side note, the language about the 2/3, I'll make sure that that matches the language above that talks about the 2/3 so that it is consistent. The next section, Christian?
sorry, just one thing. I was thinking that it would be really helpful in delivering the recommendations to city council and for the public to review, to have like a diagram of that process built out. And I'm happy to draft something or work with the chair, whoever, to do that, because it would just be really helpful to have a visual of like step 1, investigations completed, and it gets sent back 30 days, 40 or 45 days, 30-day extension. Step 2, 30 days, step 3, independent investigation with 2/3 majority. I feel like it would just be good to show the public what the new process would be, or what the proposed process should be.
Great idea. I think a diagram would definitely kind of help solidify the understanding of the process. Thank you, Christian. Okay. So next we're going to move on to the relationship between the Civilian Oversight Board and the Office of Police Oversights. So realizing that we're going to, well, let's just open this up. So let's start with section 1. The COB participating in the hiring process of the Director of Police Oversight, which will be a full-time employee of the City of Santa Barbara. Now, I realize that employee of the City of Santa Barbara, we may need to revisit that language at our next meeting, depending on what comes back with the memo. So anything in section 1 that anybody would like to comment on? John or Sean, anything you would like to add?
Give me things, looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Christian?
I was thinking, and I don't have any problems with the way this is written, but I was thinking of the process that played out in South Bend, Indiana, where someone was hired, they were found to be a person with former law enforcement and misconduct and a record of misconduct, which caused a lot of complications for that board and for the department and everybody involved with the oversight process. And I'm thinking, like, the city administrator hires someone without due diligence, and something like that occurs, right? Where that's discovered and the board loses confidence. Is there like a no confidence section that would be required, or like should be stipulated, or is that not really a matter of like best practice? Like that would just be implied.
So there isn't often, I mean, often there's a process. I mean, once someone is hired, I think what you've done here is something that wasn't specifically outlined in the ordinance of the city that you are talking about. And that is that the community shall, or the process shall include community input. So that part was completely bypassed. There was no, at a minimum, often there are kind of public forums where candidates can answer questions of the community. You can see how they interact with the community. Like, that's just an example. And that whole process and all of kind of those effective practices were bypassed in that particular situation. So I think that language about shall include community input at least allows some of those things for the community and others to kind of have any idea of what is happening. And then less likely to find out surprises in the end. And then once you hire them, I mean, having going back to the hiring section about, not being able to just fire them without cause, there would have to be you'd have to adhere to that.
Thanks.
Okay. If there is not any other comments, or not any other comments on that section, let's move to section 2. That the director would have significant independence in the discretion in conducting the day-to-day activities. The director shall also act as directed by and in collaboration with the COB. Any comments, Christian?
Sorry, taking up a lot of space tonight. On the, I just wanted to hear from Mr. Doimus on whether this should read must instead of shall.
Must or shall are kind of synonymous with each other. Shall being mandatory, may being permissive. So if you want it to be mandatory, shall is, I think, the best language, because that's what's used all the time. Being mandatory, required.
Thanks for the clarification, John. Okay. Any other comments on section 2? Also, John or Sean, if you have anything, please jump in. Okay. Hearing none, section 3, the OPO providing staff support to the COB. Any comments or questions? I think that this subsection we need to make sure that that lines up with the community ombuds, the language used in the community ombuds section. Write myself a little note about that. Okay. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Section 4, in collaboration with the COB, the OPO, will be responsible for coordinating all required and specialized training for the COB. And then let's go ahead and throw in the last one. The director shall carry out other duties that fall within the mandate of the OPO and are requested by the COB. Any comments or concerns, edits to those sections? John and Sean, please feel free to jump in if you have any. Sean?
I know this has been discussed before, and I would just throw out that I think it was understood, or maybe I understood it, that the police department will probably need to be involved in helping to provide some of this training, or at least informing it. So I'm not sure if there's any room in this for collaboration with the PD as well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on this section before we move along? Okay. The next section, self-evaluation. So, recommended at the end of the 3rd year of the OPO and COB's creation, and every 5 years thereafter, the director and the COB shall undertake a detailed self-evaluation of both of them, consistent with the city's current process. So let's take, well, really, I received very few comments on this last section. The only one was, like we did in an earlier section, took out the time frame that was attached to the city council so that they didn't have a specified time frame to respond in. So I think I'll just kind of open this section up, since if anybody has any comments, edits, questions, concerns. I feel like you all know it's the last section, and so no one wants to say anything, so we can move on. Although this is a pretty, I mean, we've kind of talked about some of these things before, and I think at least in the different working groups, it's come up. So John, Sean, do you have any comments on this section?
No comments. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then I will not just sit here and force the issue. So before I turn it over back to you, Gabe, just to let you know, I'll work with the auditor monitor drafting working group to come up with some additional changes based on our conversation tonight. And then in 2 weeks, we will have the last bit of edits to go through. Christian?
I just want to really thank you, Cami, and the drafting subcommittees. An extraordinary amount of work went into this, the chair, vice chair, and we have a really good looking draft here of recommendations. It looks good. We have broad consensus here on this last part, which is great. And I just want to thank everyone. And I think a lot of the stuff where we talked about is very much semantics, right? Where it's like a word here and a thing here. And I know we're trying to balance being intentional with being effective too, but I think the hope also is that a lot of the words from these recommendations, like the phrasing, is also adopted into a future ordinance as well. And so I think us being intentional here and taking the time to review and maybe dealing with some eye rolls when I say, this should it be shall or must, is a really important part of the process, because we're hoping that it gets adopted into the ordinance as much as we put together here. And so thanks everybody for the hard work. It looks great.
Thank you for that, Christian. And I just want to say that all of you in all of the working groups have done an amazing amount of work to make this happen. And it has been a pleasure to work with all of you on it. And I for sure have enjoyed all of it, every last hour of it. So thank you for all of your hard work. And Gabe, I will turn it over to you.
This is so exciting. Couldn't say it any better. Thank you, Christian, for those comments. Thank you, Cami. Thank you, team. Sam, if we could open up public comment for the last time today.
Okay, give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on the discussion and review of the draft language for the oversight model, please raise your hand. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 7, review of draft language for the oversight model, please click on the hand raise feature in Zoom. There are no hands raised.
All right. So with that, we will close out item 7 and we will move on to item 8, which is future business. The only future business we have is in 2 weeks. And I will actually, Lizzie, I see your hand.
I'm just curious because yesterday City Council held their first in-person meeting where they were in chambers. And so I know that boards and commissions were following City Council precedents on that. So I'm just curious if and when we will have conversations about meeting in person or some hybrid version of it.
Yeah, Sam and John.
Yes, so let me bring that up to the administration and I will respond to the commission.
Thank you, Sam. Any other comments from the commission? Christian?
Sorry, just one last one. An article was written in the Independent about the commission's work today. It was published today. It would be great if we could get that into the next board packet, just so that the board has can review it if they don't have time to read it between now and then.
Sounds great. Thank you. All right, so we get a week off and then we come back on February 9th, a well-deserved break. Thank you all for a marathon of a month. I see Jordan.
Yeah, and so as many folks know, February is Black History Month, and so there are a lot of online events and some in-person events that are coming around the bend. So I'll have a press release actually ready by tomorrow that has all that information. So if it's okay to share with you, Gabe, to share with the rest of the group, please do so. And folks, please feel free to share with your communities as we celebrate Black History Month, not only in February, but all throughout the year. So thanks.
Thank you for that, Jordan. Yes, I will definitely share that with the full commission and the rest of our networks. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, anything else? All right, team, we made it. We made it through. Very excited. Thank you all for your hard work. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we will adjourn today's meeting at 8:08.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.